Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Qdabra's weekly webinar. I want to start off and apologize for the delay in getting this webinar done. We've been trying to get the Power BI webinar done for 3 weeks now, and we finally are very happy to have something to show you. I have with me Jim Cantwell, and Jim is a senior architect and solution engineer at Qdabra. He's been with us since 2004. Before joining Qdabra, Jim spent about 15 years working at Microsoft and in the tech industry. He is our senior guy here at Qdabra, and he's got a lot to show you today. Jim?
Sorry, let me get back.
We're going to run a quick poll. We'll switch to the next slide first. You want to say hello to everyone?
Hi, everybody. I'm glad I can present to you a little bit about Power BI today. Hopefully, by the end of this little presentation, you'll be kind of well on your way. If you haven't already looked at Power BI, be able to at least get into Power BI and get some nice little charts on your SharePoint data.
Let's take a quick question here to everyone on what they're using today. Jim, can you switch to the next slide, please? Thank you. So we have a quick poll here just to see. We only have 5 answers possible in the GoToWebinar poll, but if we can get a quick take on what people are using today, and obviously you're here for Power BI, but who knows, maybe you're already using it. We're looking at about 50% voted, so we'll give it another 5 seconds here, 10 seconds, and thanks for playing the game here. We've been doing all these things and more. SQL Services not on here, so that would be other, we have a lot to talk to you about today. It looks like most of you, 43%, are using Excel services, 36% of you have no solution, and 21% are using a custom web page, and 21% are using other. Great. Well, thank you so much for giving us that quick feedback. And Jim, I'll be quiet now.
So why Power BI? Essentially, the main, of course, is
Jim, do you have audio?
mainly to visualize. Do you not hear me? Can you hear me?
Jim?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I don't think we have audio, Jim. I think we're missing audio.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Okay, thanks, guys. It's just me.
Oh, okay. Great. So being able to visualize your data is what Power BI is all about. So right now there's desktop, web, and mobile app versions. So you can get to your data on your phone or your mobile device. And you also have the ability to pull data from various cloud services that currently supported. There's quite a big list. And you also have a visualizer gallery, which lets you select from third-party as well as custom visualizers that will find monthly updates pretty much on the service and the desktop version. So the also being able to create your own custom visualizers if you're into developing web parts for either yourself or third-party sale. And now there's a free and pro version of Power BI. The service online is free for 1 GB per user storage and a refresh of 10,000 rows per hour, which for a small site may be sufficient to get your data without having to wait for it to get refreshed. But if you have a large amount of data and large number of users, 10 gig per user in the Pro version, which is, I think, right now $9.95 a month, and refresh of 1 million rows per hour. Consume streaming data, access on-premise data via gateways, which if you're going to access SQL Server on your on-premise or your Azure VM or any VM that's hosted with SQL Server, you can get to it via a gateway that Microsoft provides, and one gateway will give you access to all your internal SQL devices or SQL servers. And you can also share content among your organization. The free version limits what sharing you can do without having to go through some extra hurdles. And the full pricing is available at the PowerBI Microsoft.com. Now, the third-party service is a pretty long list, but if any of you are using these services or others, then you have an easy way to pull data from those, to, especially if you're doing a dashboard for any large application that's using a lot of different services. Now, where do you find Power BI? Well, if you haven't ever accessed or logged into BI, you might not actually see the Power BI icon. But if you do, then it's going to be, don't really like the color they picked for it, but they got a nice bright yellow Power BI button that will appear once you've at least signed in once to Power BI. So if it's not there, then you would go to powerbi.microsoft.com, click sign in. The app will not be on the SharePoint or the Office 365 page right away. It will eventually kind of get into the system so that if you refresh, then that icon should appear. But you can also just go through the Power BI or just go directly to the app.powerbi.com. Now, what I'm going to do is just walk through accessing your SharePoint list from the Power BI desktop. Right now, the desktop app is actually required in order to establish a connection to the SharePoint list. If you do it from the Power BI web service, you won't be able to actually create the connection, but you can actually create it on the desktop and upload it to the Power BI service and access it from there. So I'll actually switch over to the Power BI app, and so this is actually the endpoint which I want to get to, but I'm just going to kind of give you a quick overview of what the live interactions are with Power BI. Just like some of the other, like probably Power Query and Excel, you've got some interactions so that you can select a component of this one is actually a support list that has a ticket information, when it was open, when it was resolved, who resolved it. And it's basically got all the people's names for who resolved the ticket. And here, this is actually average days to resolve, the number of tickets that the person had. So these points are just indicating the total for that period of time. Now, in this case, the year submitted is not selected, so it's showing all the data from 2010 to 2016. And if I select a specific year, I get automatic filter down into the content. And you can also filter down a specific month. And if I select July, shows all the data for July and all the users. And if I select a specific user, let's say I select on, then it'll actually reflect here the actual individual days that a ticket was opened and how long it took to resolve. And on this chart, we've got the total number of tickets for that period with the individual. In this case, most of them don't have a resolve by. That's actually our data issue, but so it's pretty live as far as it is refreshed since it's on the list, and I've actually got the Pro edition, the Trial Pro installed. It's refreshing up to 1 million rows per hour. I'm actually not refreshing when I'm drilling through here, but it is, if I refresh the data, then it would pull back within that limit on the number of rows per hour. But usually would have to really be pulling a lot to get 1 million rows per hour. So what I'm going to first do is I've actually got a second page here. Now if I go back to this real quick. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the data, basically have to go through and tell it where the list is. And there's a lot of different things you can pull content from. So the SharePoint lists can be found under All or Other. And once you select the SharePoint list, you just provide it with the URL. And then one thing I don't show in there is the actual prompting for the credentials. I'm going to do that real quick for you, just let you see if I get data. Actually, this one, since I already was connected to the site, if you initially you will get a prompt to select what kind of authentication you want to use, and you'll just select that you want to use your organizational account if you're 365. If you're accessing SharePoint data on a local 2013 server, then you can enter in your Windows, select your Windows credentials to connect. And when you select, whoa, that's good. That's one I've never seen. This is one of the things that, since it is kind of a early version of the product, really, this is the December version, but occasionally, I haven't actually had it crash like that before, but it does occasionally have some drawing issues when you're setting up in the designer. I haven't seen any drawing issues on the actual graphing, but in the designer portion, I have run into a few issues. So I'm just going to open up the one I've previously saved, and now when you pull in a list or any other data source, you get your queries listed here, and you can edit. And in this case, I've already filtered it down to specific columns. When you are connecting to a list, let me connect to this, you'll see when you connect to the list, you will see all the internal columns that a SharePoint list has. So you're going to get tons of information in that list that you're never going to want to view in your charts. So what you'll do is, also this is one of the other little bugs that you come across when you're connecting to your list, but as I found out that even though you get that error, it does actually create the list or the data source. And once you choose your columns, in this case, the ID isn't necessarily needed. That's actually the SharePoint ID. But if you wanted to have that information so that if you were to possibly create a link to a list item, then you could create a URL. And in this case, this is actually ticket ID in the demo that I put together. I actually renamed it. So this is one of the nice things that you can select the columns that you want to bring in, and you can edit the query and change the names, add new columns based on existing columns using functions like you have in Excel, and also rename. I like to rename after putting together some the charts. I actually found that it was much better to rename the columns to be something that was more user-friendly than having to go back in and attempt to change some of the charts after the fact. So what we'll do is I'm going to go back to the demo file. And what we'll see is that, let me close that query. And how did I get to that view? The chart I had, well, what I did is all I did was first I dragged over the average days to resolve. And that just gives me the average days to resolve was 12. That's the entire data set, not a whole lot of information. And next, I want to be able to say how many average days to resolve by the person who resolved it. So I just drag it over onto the chart, and now I have a chart with all the average days to resolve for everyone that had a ticket. But that's not a whole lot of good information. So I really need to be able to kind of filter that down, possibly by the date. So right now, there are some third-party slicers that allow you to drill down into month and day, but right now, out of the box, you don't have quite as good a selection of filtering, so we're just going to go with what's out of the box right now. And I've added a slicer. This is the little slicer filter. And I actually have created, one of the things I did is because the date result or date time opened is a date time field. I created a date opened, which is actually just the date portion, and also created a month submitted, which is the month that was the ticket was open, and also the year submitted. So I want first to be able to filter on the year. And once I've added on there, all I have to do is select a year out of that selection. It automatically is filtering that content for this other part. and now I have all the counts by person who resolved it by for the specific year 2015. And now if I just want to add another slicer, I'll just put another slicer here and I will put the month submitted there. And now I can actually drill down into specific month. So I'm gonna, but I also want to kind of get the number of tickets that a person actually resolved, because the average isn't necessarily a good number if it's one ticket. So in this case, notice I've got it's a clustered column chart, but I want to add a line in there. So I select line and clustered column. So now I have changed this chart type, and now I can drag over the ticket ID into the line value, and that gives me a line with the actual count of tickets that that person resolved. So that kind of reflects a little better information as far as how many tickets they actually handled and the average time to resolve. And also, if I wanted to add kind of chart for just seeing how many people, or not how many, but how many tickets and kind of what percentage a user resolved, then I'll drag the resolve by over. And actually, let's see here. But wrong one. That's not resolved. I will average days resolve. So I've got the average days resolved by the individual. So now that I've added all these parts, everything that I do here for the filters will reflect on each of the parts. And if I select a specific person, say I select Patrick here, it will actually highlight Patrick in the pie over here. And we can do the I actually wanted the so in this one we're going to give the individual going to have the date opened, and then we're going to have the oops. Actually, one of the things is when you drag a date over, it's going to automatically select date hierarchy. We want to show the date as a actual date span. So now the this is need to remove that, and that's okay. So now I've pulled over the average, the date for this, the X, and then the days to resolve on the Y. And if I select here, now I actually am drilling down into the 2015, this is 2015, and if I select, say, one person down here, it shows all their individual tickets and length of time to resolve. So you can kind of get a better picture of that average is, was it a bunch of short time resolutions and a few large ones? It's basically lets you visually get a better idea of your data. So you're not making assumptions based on just some averages here. You can kind of get a better view of things. And
Jim, this is awesome. This is Patrick. Can you hear me now? I just wanted to give you the 8:30 a.m. time ticker here, and we've got a couple questions too. I think we're pretty close to the question slide, right?
Yes, I believe so.
You had one question on where to download Power BI from. That's the desktop app. Did you cover that? Was that the link that we had in that initial slide?
Well, actually, let me go to that real quick, because that is not in the, I'll bring up the, if you go to the Power BI site, the powerbi.microsoft.com, and since I was doing everything in the desktop version, let me switch over real quick to the, okay. Now this is the Power BI service, the website version. So it looks pretty much the same, and if you notice up in the upper right corner, there's this little download. There's Power BI for mobile, desktop, and gateways. If you select Power BI desktop, that will download the Power BI desktop application, and you can access it. Now, Power BI gateways is if you have an on-premise SQL or other supported content type on-premise, you can set up the gateway, and that does require the Power BI Pro, so you can sign up for the trial if you wanted to access it just for a trial basis to see if it works for you, and then you can access all that content. I've got some gateways set up on Azure as well as on-premise servers, and data throughput has been really good, but it's pretty quick and easy to download the Power BI desktop. It's not a very large download.
Great. This is great to see that this is working in the browser just like you had in the designer. And just once again, Michael, the answer to your question then is once you go to the Power BI on 365 or on SharePoint 2013, then you should have the link at the top there to download the desktop. The second question we had from Stacy, do you have a link to show the differences between the self-service business intelligence to discover, analyze, and visualize data in Excel, which is, of course, the BI for the E3 plan, versus the E5 with Power BI? So the difference being the Excel services in E3 versus the Power BI in E5, which is what we're showing here. Jim, do you have any idea what the main differences is? Stacy's saying that the pivot tables and charts can also be done in Excel services already. Do you have any idea on what the main value add for Power BI is when compared to Excel services?
No, not in that comparison. The Excel services, I'm assuming some things here, but Power BI is geared to connecting to a lot of various sources where Excel services may not be, but I'm not really versed that well on the Excel services side to compare.
What about connecting to Access Web App? Does Power BI let you do that?
I'm sorry?
The next question we had from John was, what about connecting to an Access Web App as a data source? Does Power BI let you do that?
Actually, I have not. Let me go up, bring up that list. So this list is actually, you've got Access Database, but I'm not, I would imagine that Access Database could be in this case what you would use, but whether that Access Database is on
Azure, probably.
Yeah,
probably in Azure, because I think they automatically create them in Azure now. Okay, so that's where you go, John. I'm gonna, because of the time here, I want to just get to David's question, and then I think we'll wrap up. And if anyone else has a quick question, please throw it in there. Marlon, I see your question. Thank you. So David has a question: Power BI compared to Power Query, Power Pivot, and Power View. He's got a nice link in here to Stack Overflow. What we'll do, thanks, David. I'll put that in the deck before we send it out. But there is a nice difference between those 3 or 4 different powers. I guess there's 3 powers: Power BI, Power Query, Power Pivot, Power View. That's 4. We'll put that in the deck. Thank you, David. That's great. Marlon has a question, and yeah, Marlon's just, I think, just clarifying that Access web apps store their data in SQL in Azure. Yep, that's correct. And we would just connect to SQL then. Thank you, Marlon, for helping us answer that question. So, John, answer to your question is to connect to the Azure database, apparently, that Azure is storing the data in. And I think that within Access, you can find that if you open up Access in the rich client, you can get the URL. It's kind of one of these strange URLs with a lot of numbers in it, with a unique identifier. But you can get access to the database, I think, there, and then just plug that in as if it was SQL. Hopefully that would work. Okay, well, that I think is it for questions. I just want to thank you, Jim, for this wonderful webinar. We are going to put this up on our YouTube site, so you'll have the video. We'll also the deck, the PowerPoint deck, along with the sample that Jim created. And if you answer our 4-question survey at the end, you'll get that. And I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. We are planning to do another webinar next week. And we'll be continuing to talk about reporting and Power BI in our weekly webinars this year. Thank you so much for joining. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, everyone.